Welcome to the Athletic Approach, where we discuss some of the overlooked aspects of sports and mentality.
This show is brought to you by Culture in Sports, where we believe that culture is critical to long-term success. I'm Manisha Agarwal.
And I'm Bryce Strecker, and this is the Athletic Approach.
So today we're going to talk about how different sports requires different mental skills. But before we get into that, we'll go into a bit about us and our backgrounds. So I've done a undergraduate psychology degree at Liverpool John Moores University, and I stayed there and did my master's in sports psychology. So I've done my stage one training, that's accredited by the British Psychological Society, and I'm hoping to start my stage two training soon.
And I did my undergraduate in physical education and health sciences at McPherson College in Kansas, where I played baseball there for 4 years as well. And then after that, I did my master's degree at Adams State University, and that one was in applied sports psychology. And right now, I'm currently finishing up the last little bits of my certification for the Certified Mental Performance Coach through the Association of Applied Sports Psychology. So hopefully soon, I'll be a certified CMPC and continue doing this with athletes.
That is so exciting. And then we can, kind of, it is so important to have that accreditation. And as well, even just talking about ourselves, like my background is in dance, and even then we can imagine so many differences between baseball and dance, and kind of like the different mental skills that can go into two sports that are completely different. I mean, dance is still kind of, is it a sport? Is it not? I'd like to think it is. But yeah, there's a lot of things to sort of consider. And I guess one of the things to mention is that from having different mental skills, there's different physical demands within these sports. So I know that, for example, with dance, you've got to be flexible. That's something that maybe isn't required in a lot of other sports. And then I guess another example is sort of Michael Jordan and how he found it so different to basketball. Basketball and baseball, again, two very different sports. And then again, because of the different physical demands, leads to different mental skills and different psychological demands as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how you kind of pointed out the drastic differences between our two backgrounds, because I can't even imagine like some of the psychological demands that come with dance. Being up there, it's very much like an isolated thing where you're the center of attention and like nothing else matters for a couple of minutes. Where in baseball, I guess it's similar in a way where nothing matters for the majority of the game. There's, 90% of baseball games are like 1-0, 2-0. And so I get the whole crowd that baseball is boring. I disagree, but I understand the point of it. And then from a psychological perspective, it's a weird thing, because your head can be off in the clouds and you can be thinking about anything in the world for 8.5 innings. And then all of a sudden you're up to bat in the bottom of the ninth inning with the tying run on third base. And if you're not prepared for that mentally and you're not locked in and ready to go, and your head is still in the clouds, you almost stand no chance. So being able to like balance that mixture of being all over the place, kind of just doing your thing, and then switching over and locking in 100%, being fully focused and present in that moment, is a really weird dynamic in that sport specifically. Is your organization's culture struggling?
Do you need some help identifying, analyzing, and changing your organization's culture?
If so, please reach out to us at cultureinsports.com or on social medias so we can help your organization perform at its highest levels.
At Culture in Sports, our focus is to provide solutions and transformations for long-term success. No, 100%. And it's like, again, that idea of focus. And again, with again, the differences with dance is that you're on stage for a couple of minutes, and usually 3 to 4 minutes, depending on how long the choreography is. And you're thinking about what are you thinking about sort of before stage, like before getting on stage. Like a lot of the time, I've always been told, don't go over the choreo before you're about to go on stage because you're going to mess up because you keep going over it. But then it's quite interesting because once you're on stage, you don't really think about it because it becomes that muscle memory. And I guess that's where a state of flow can come into it, for those few minutes where you just you're just doing what you need to do and whatever happens, happens. And then again, that memory is all psychological. Like how do you have good memory to pick up the choreography? And that comes through training, and everyone has different training backgrounds. And again, that kind of expands to different genres of dance. And again, with how different players can come from different sport backgrounds and how they interpret their sport to be and how they interpret their play. And I guess if they buy into mental skills and psychology as well. So it goes into a whole other kind of dimension.
Yeah. The difference, like the different demands between different sports is one thing, and then you hit it there at the end, the buy-in is everything. It's without that, from especially from the top down, in the work we do, whether you're working with an individual or a team, it's still different. If we're working with a team, you need that buy-in not only from the players because you want them to learn these skills that we're talking about, but you need that buy-in from the higher ups, the coaches, the people up top that are okaying you're working with the team and all that stuff. If they're still in that headspace of like, we don't need this work, it's not going to benefit us, then you stand almost no chance of possibly benefiting that team, because for one, they're not going to let you in. And say they do, let us come and work with them, but they're very anti our work. The players model that. It's that culture that they built within that program, whatever the coaches are doing and behaving like and believing in, players are bound to model it. So if they're against it and they don't, show up to our sessions, or they don't care if they have the sessions, they don't care if the players go to the sessions, whatever it is, that's going to like filter through the whole program, and the players are going to be there listening to us, but just to check the box. They're there so they don't have to be punished by coach, or they're there because they have nothing better to do, where that's obviously not where we want to be. We would much rather have that true buy-in, coaches that are looking to build that healthy culture from a mental and physical standpoint and bring us in to help with that mental side especially. And they're bought into it. They preach it to the athletes, and the athletes are all of a sudden interested. And we can kind of give our pitch and just keep kind of reeling them in. And then lo and behold, they're actually listening and they're learning and they're making adjustments and they're growing and changing over time.
Yeah, no, 100%. And kind of with that buy-in, it's one thing to be kind of persuaded into what sports psychology can bring, but then it's also buying into you as a sports psychologist, because if they don't like you as a person, then it's likely to not really work because they don't want to hear things from you. They may, and again, it kind of goes back to if they love the idea of psychology, but they're a bit like, oh, but I don't want to hear it from this guy, then really less engaged to then less likely to engage within the mental skill. And that's so different again amongst different sports, like this culture. And with that comes different funding as well. So some sports, highly, kind of appreciate sports psychology, but then other sports don't really appreciate it, or they don't understand enough about it. And if you don't know enough, then that's kind of where the issues can come, or kind of where you're less likely to get that funding for a sports psychologist, because sometimes sport as an industry, it is quite cutthroat, and that's kind of the same with dance and like the performing arts. And if you don't have that kind of that culture, then it's so hard to then buy into what sports psychology is about, and also you as a person. So yeah, no, completely, yeah, ticked the box on that. Because it's so important to understand why it's important, but also understand that mental skills isn't a quick fix. Psychology in general isn't a quick fix. And with that comes with how you view and interpret a, an athlete, but understanding that they're also a person underneath that athlete. And with the mental skills comes with therapy as well, or even not even just that, it's having a conversation with them, just like on the sidelines, or kind of just if you sat having a lunch with them, it's those conversations where sometimes they'll open up to you, and it's not always a mental skill, but it's how you, again, how you approach that and how you appear as an individual. Um, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's all the relationships. That's kind of the kicker of everything. And I think even outside our realm and just in traditional sports, the coaching aspect is all relationships. If similar to what you were saying about athletes and coaches buying into us as people, it's the same way where a kid can go in playing a sport they've loved their whole life. And we hear horror stories all the time of ex coach ruined the sport for me. I lost the love of the game because of my coach. I completely understand that. And it's because of that relationship piece where if you don't, either one, you don't build that relationship from our role, or like you're saying, you don't have that chance to build that relationship, these mental skills and the stuff we can offer are never going to land. So that you mentioned the quick fix, which is what everybody's looking for, especially with us. The classic, setup is a coach is like, well, I've heard about sports psychology and I think it could help my team. Let's bring Manisha in. She'll talk at the beginning of the year for an hour and we're good to go. Boom, national champions. It's a lock. It doesn't work that way. So I think like once we have that buy-in from the teams and from the coaches, they also have to be aware that this isn't going to just fix everything like that. We can't just sit there and give them this information and talk about confidence, talk about dealing with adversity, talk about being able to focus, and it just like change everything overnight. These things that we're talking about, we call them mental skills for a reason. They're skills, just like the physical demands and the physical skills required for your sport. Where if, we'll take a basketball player. The first time they picked up a ball when they were, 3, 4, 5 years old, they were just heaving the ball with everything they had just to get it to the rim. And then here they are 15 years later, they're a college basketball player with, a jump shot that is muscle memory. It's nothing now. They can just do it in their sleep. This stuff works the same way. They're skills that take time to get to that like advanced level. The reason you grew from this 5-year-old basketball player to this college basketball player was, yes, you physically grew up and matured, but you went to practice every day. You learned how to shoot a jump shot. You learned how to dribble. You learned how to play defense. And over time, those things through your practice, through your reps, through your effort, started to stick and become automatic. It works the same way in these mental skills and demands that we're talking about, where the more you practice learning how to focus effectively and you practice boosting your own confidence and working on your self-talk, those things start to click and become automatic for us. So over time, if these people are bought in and willing to like try some weird things, try new things, try doing things differently than they have in the past, and then they put in the practice and put in the reps, then that's when you finally get to see kind of the fruits of your labor and seeing these mental skills click and actually help you deal with things that happen in games.
100%. And with that, it's trying to actually, it's how do you buy those athletes into sports psychology? Because they will have their own preferences and differences. So even within one sport, each individual is a person and they will have preferences. They probably don't like to sit and write goals. That probably doesn't work for them, but they could probably sit and visualize, okay, this is what the next game is going to look like, or thinking back to previous experiences and seeing how they felt from that and sort of moving forward. And if you don't understand that each individual is an individual, it's so hard to then try to place every mental skill on every individual, because again, it's going back to that, no, there's no one size fits all approach. And if the individual themselves is not motivated to carry out this mental skill, then you're not going to see that change. And I think that's just really important to reiterate, because it's even within sport itself, they'll have preferences in what position they want to play. And if they don't have that choice, they don't have that motivation to then think, okay, I want to do this mental skill. And with that as well, is that you don't want to pile on, or you can do this, you can do that, and it's thinking about what they need and what their needs are, rather than to kind of showcase, oh, this is what you can do, and trying to over glamorize sports psychology almost to kind of, and sometimes that can be a bit off-putting because you're trying to force it too much, rather than listening to the athletes. And that kind of idea of, these are the skills that you need to do, why not listen to the athlete and hear out what it is that they need to do? Because a lot of the time in sport, players are told, you need to do this, you need to do that. And sports psychology almost gives them that space to be themselves, in the sense where they can ask for what they need, because they don't always have that opportunity. And I think as a sports psychologist, you need to open up that safe space where they can approach you and talk to you about things that maybe their coach doesn't want to hear. And then you've got that kind of way in where you can think, okay, let's try these mental skills. Or maybe it's not mental skills that you need, maybe it's just a chat. And it's not
Yeah,
always that kind of, oh, yeah, like I said, let's sit down and write these goals, because it might not work for them. And that's the same, again, reflecting as a sports psychologist, is you don't want to have your own background or your own preferences to be reflected onto the player, because it's not you. It's not you that's the
right,
athlete. It's the individual that's sort of sat right in front of you.
right. That piece that you talked about there, that I'm sure we'll talk about multiple times in the future because it's so massive in everything in sports and in life for that matter, is that autonomy piece. Giving those athletes the ability to like have a little bit of say so, to have a little bit of power in a situation, because for as long as they've existed, sports don't typically work that way. Coaches are in charge. Coach says practice is at this time. And in practice, we're doing this, this, and this. And then after practice, you're doing this. And then we leave for the game at this time. And it's just kind of like following a schedule, doing what you're told, not really having a say so, which isn't innately a bad thing. It creates structure. Again, could go on for hours, but it creates good things. But there is drawbacks to it. It prevents those athletes from having that freedom to find exactly what suits them best. So if we have that ability to give them that power, to give them the autonomy, it creates that motivation, like you said, for them to buy in and really go all in on the mental side of things to kind of make up for maybe what they're missing on the physical side. So any way we can talk with them and start to learn what they really need, what they're looking for, what they want to get to, instead of, like you said, just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks, then I think we tend to have a lot more success. From our side, we get to provide like the actual useful things that they can put into practice right away. And from their side, it creates that want to, that excitement behind it, knowing that, hey, I chose this topic. This is what I really want to learn about. So let's lock in, let's listen, let's try these things out.
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think to have someone that can listen is so important than to just have someone to tell you what to do and when to do it. And with that comes with knowing that sports psychology isn't always about sports, ironically. And I think that is so important, is to have that understanding. And again, that comes back to kind of the culture that the individual is in, and what the sport kind of kind of, what's the word? Don't know what the word is. Kind of what the sport understands to be important for the individual, and understanding that their own mental health and well-being can be something outside of sport that affects their performance. Because if because as a sports psychologist, you can go into things that are outside of the sport, and sometimes coaches, physios, nutritionists, they don't really want to know about that. Some of them do, and having that holistic approach is so important. But as a sports psychologist, you do then have that that freedom again to explore really what it is that they want, because sometimes it might not be that they want to carry on in the sport that they're in. Maybe it's retirement that they're thinking of, maybe, or again, if there's an injury that they're going through, because again, you're working with athletes that probably are out for injury. It's not always the active players, it's not always the star players. If they're going through an injury, again, it's different mental skills in the sense of how do you help that player to be back training, because they might have that anxiety of re-injury, and then again, that's very different. Those mental skills that you'll be working with that player is very different to say I don't know, like a dancer that's probably going through an eating disorder. Two very different things. And then again, it's to what extent can a sports psychologist bring to it that doesn't go over the boundaries of what we're qualified to do as well, because a lot of it can then overlap with clinical psychology. And yeah, and again, that idea of anxiety can be performance anxiety, but if it's like general anxiety disorders, then again, boundaries can be crossed, but it doesn't mean that we can't help. Maybe it's a referral. It goes, and again, it comes back to that culture of what the sport appreciates, and kind of again, because you've seen a lot in sort of the news about gymnasts coming forward and saying that a lot of things have been abusive, and right now you don't want to come to them and say, okay, let's sit down and do some visualization, because that's probably not what they need.
Right.
And it's going back to that kind of digging deeper down and going through therapy. And sometimes it's having those boundaries that are so important, to then see, okay, what is the mental skill that's needed here, and not just within kind of boxing off different sports, but the individuals within that sport.
Yeah, we talk a lot about mental skills, and you hit a great point of where a lot of the stuff in this kind of realm that we're in branches well outside of sports. And it's really good for us and for everybody to know that, and know those boundaries you were talking about, where we do draw lines at points where it's outside of our expertise, and that's where referrals come in, and we look for other people to help us out and things like that. It's just such an interesting field, and I know we kind of started to scratch the surface of it today, talking about some of the skills and stuff, but hopefully, as we go through this, we can really get a little deeper into the nuts and bolts, the workings of specific mental skills. That's kind of what this is all about.
Thank you for joining us today at The Athletic Approach. Please visit us at cultureinsports.com.
And follow us on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and Facebook at Culture in Sports, as well as on Twitter at Culture in Sport.